Times where the message is clear, concise, and it's understood. But there are other times where it is not so clear, where it is not so understood, if you will. And our message today is from the book of Esther, and it is entitled, "For Such a Time as This." And it's talking about a time when a young lady and her cousin Mordecai faced some problems that I would suggest are overwhelming. Somebody wanted them dead. In fact, they wanted all their people dead. And I guess you and I probably haven't faced that kind of struggle, but I suspect that all of you have at one point in time wished that you had been born in another time or place. That you look around at the troubles of this world and you go, you know, why do I have to face this? Why did I have to look at this? Because I know plenty of generations that did not. And it's a valid question. Why are you here for now? Why are you here and now in this particular time with all the struggles and troubles that come with it? And I think to know the answer to that question, we have to look at people who did in fact grow up in that time. And the book of Esther is a perfect example of a young lady who grew up in very difficult times. She lost both of her parents. She was an orphan. She was raised by her cousin. She was probably orphaned when Nebuchadnezzar took over their land, killed a majority of their people, and took many of them captive, including Mordecai and Esther. Now, they're living in servitude in a foreign country. They're not very well liked, but by some very minor stroke of miracles, and most people would say an impossible miracle, Esther becomes queen. Now, that would maybe suspect that that gives her some power, but in this organization, being queen doesn't mean much. In fact, if you look at the book of Esther and you see her predecessor was killed simply by not listening to what the king told her to do. And so she was killed publicly as a token of just where her place was. So Esther's in a hard place. And it makes it harder because there's a guy named Haman who hates her cousin and wants to destroy all of Israel and all the Jews. I'm going to start reading in Esther 3, verses 12 through 15. And the scribes were summoned on the 13th day of the first month on an edict according to all that Haman had commanded, and was written in the king's satrap and the governors of over all the provinces and all the officials of all the peoples, to every province in its own script and in every people in its own language. It was written in the name of King Ahasuerus and sealed to the king's signet ring. Letters were sent out by couriers to all the king's provinces with the instructions to destroy, to kill, and annihilate all Jews, young and old, women and children, in one day, the 13th day of the 12th month, which is the month of Adar, and to plunder their goods. A copy of the document was issued and decreed in every province. A proclamation became ready for that day. The couriers went out hurriedly by the order of the king, and the decree was issued in Susa as citadel. And the king and Haman sat down to drink, while the city of Susa was thrown into confusion. Imagine being a Jew and finding out that an order has been signed and dated that on such a date, the entire nation that you live in, all the provinces, are instructed to kill you. And not only you, but your wife, your children, anyone associated with you, and that all your goods are going to be plundered. It is not the kind of place you want to be. It is not the kind of place that Mordecai and Esther wanted to be. And I will tell you, I can't really comprehend what that looks like, although I will tell you that the Jews have faced this challenge many times in their history. More recently, in the time of Hitler, who wanted to annihilate all Jews. There is no accident, by the way, of that. The Jews are God's chosen people. For Satan, no one group is more desirous to destroy than the Jews. He desires to destroy God's chosen people, to thumb his nose at God. And yet, if we see history, and many, many, many Jews have died in Holocaust throughout the generations, God does save his people, at least a remnant. But for you and me, Gentiles, if you will, this isn't a problem. We're not Jewish. We're not likely to be targeted. But the time that you live in is perhaps not the time you'd like to live in. None of us decided 3 years ago that it would be interesting and fun to go into a pandemic. Nobody said, this would be an interesting challenge. Let's see how this works out. None of us want to see the division that we see in our country today. None of us want to be in the situation where the world is so tense and so ready to explode. And yet, here we are. And I will suggest to you that as much as Esther was probably saying, what do we do now? Many of you are also asking that same question. What do I do now? What do I do next? Because I don't know. And I think if we're going to answer our question, perhaps we look at how Esther answered her question. And that would move us down to Esther 4, verses 12 through 17. And they told Mordecai what Esther had said, and Mordecai told them to reply to Esther, "Do not think of yourself that in the king's palace you will escape any more than all the other Jews. For if you keep silent this time, relief and deliverance will rise for the Jews from another place. But you and your father's house will perish. Who knows whether you have not come into the kingdom for such a time as this?" Then Esther told them to reply to Mordecai, "Go gather all the Jews to be found in Susa. Hold a fast on my behalf. Do not eat or drink for 3 days, nights or day. And I and my young men will also fast as you do. Then I will go to the king, though it is against the law, and if I perish, I perish." Mordecai then went and did everything that Esther had ordered him to. You see, what Mordecai was asking her to do was to go to the king and intercede for the Jews. There's just one problem. The queen could not go to the king. And if she appeared before him and he wasn't in the mood, she would be put to death. She had a bad decision to make. And I love the way they did it. They fasted and prayed for 3 days prior to doing anything. And I think sometimes we so often face life with an uncertainty of what do I do now? How should I handle this? And I've heard too many times where this exasperated feeling is, well, all we can do now is pray. And I always want to laugh whenever I hear that phrase. And I've done it myself, so I'm not criticizing. But when all I can do is pray, it is the most powerful thing on the face of the earth that I can do. I am going to prayer to the God Almighty, the one who controls the entire universe. And to say that I am limited to just going to God is somewhat saying, all I have are thermonuclear weapons and somebody's going to attack me. It's not a problem. The prayer is sufficient. It reminds me of a lady who was having heart troubles, and she went to the doctor and says, Doc, my grandchild is going to have a bar mitzvah, and it's going to be in about 6 months, and can you keep me alive so I can attend his bar mitzvah. Doc says, we'll do what we can. Sure enough, they did the medical procedures and she got to the bar mitzvah. Short time later, she comes back and says, Doc, my granddaughter is getting married. It's going to be in 2 years, and I really, really want to be there. Can we work on my medical and see what we can do? And Doc says, I'll try. I don't know. You're 80 years old. You have heart troubles. But we'll do what we can. And sure enough, she's able to make the wedding. And time went by. And pretty soon the doctor got another call and says, Doc, you remember how you got me through my grandson's bar mitzvah, my granddaughter's wedding? He goes, yeah. Well, she says, I got another problem. He goes, what now? Well, I just bought a new mattress and it's got a 20-year warranty. I think we do sometimes want it like that. We want everything to go to the way we planned it. And the truth of it is, if most of you have lived long enough to know this truth for yourself, life never goes just the way you planned it. Things just never seem to work the way you figured they would. And that's discouraging because we all like to have plans. I am one of those people that I have a plan A, a plan B, and I can get down to plan Z occasionally. Because I always want to know what's going to happen and have a plan for that. But the truth of it is, I don't always know what the right answer is. But more importantly, when I face troubles, I sometimes spend more time going about poor me, poor me, poor me, or why me, than asking, why am I here? Mordecai asks Esther an important question, or basically makes a profound statement. He says, perhaps you are where you're at for such a time as this. What he means is God has put you here and now in this very hard time because you are the one who God is going to use to deliver the people. Now that changes the perspective about me asking why me. If I'm in a hard situation and I consider the fact that God may have placed me here for a reason, I need to stop asking why me and oh poor me and start saying, okay God, what is it you have in mind for me? And the truth of it is, God does have a plan. Jeremiah 29, verses 11 through 14 says it very clearly. For I know the plans I have for you, declares the Lord, plans for welfare and not evil, to give you a future and a hope. Then you will call upon me and come and pray to me, and I will hear you. You will seek me and find me when you seek me with all your heart. I will be found by you, declares the Lord, and I will restore your fortunes and gather you from the nations of all the places where I have driven you, declared the Lord, and I will bring you back to the place from which I sent you into exile. Now, this is talking very strictly about the nation of Israel, but it's also talking about a people like you and me who live in a world that is not going the way we want it. Moving down, I want to read Proverbs 3, verses 5 through 8. Trust in the Lord with all your heart. Do not lean on your own understanding. In all your ways acknowledge him, and he will make straight your paths. Be not wise in your own eyes. Fear the Lord and turn away from evil. And it will be a healing to your flesh and refreshment to your bones. God not only has a plan for you, but he does have a plan to prosper you. He has a plan to thrive you in hard times. Now, the fact that God has a plan does not eliminate the fact that I have free will. You may have recalled a little guy named Jonah in the Old Testament who also had free will and God had a plan for. And Jonah says, I don't think so, Lord. I'm going the other way. He ended up in the mouth of a whale and spent 3 days in the belly of a fish. Not listening to God will get you smelling pretty stale. Not listening to God will get you in trouble every time. However, with God, no matter how hard you face things, you will and you can overcome them. I desire to follow God's will. And the reason I desire to do that is because I'm beginning to learn. And I say beginning because it's a process that I am still in that process. But it's a process of realizing that God's will and God's plan is better than any of my plans. And trust me, like I said, I love to make plans. I must trust God more than I trust myself. I must know that God is in fact true and righteous, and that his word is valid. If I don't, well, then it's just another guy telling me something that I don't really want to hear. And you know, the truth of it is, there's a lot of people in the world today telling you things that you're probably better off not hearing. God is God. If we can't authenticate that and we can't trust in that, then we can't go the next step. Jeremiah 1, verses 4 through 5 says, "Now the word of the Lord came to me, saying, Before I formed you in the womb, I knew you. Before you were born, I consecrated you. I appointed you a prophet to all the nations." God is telling Jeremiah that he had a plan for his life while he was still a fetus. Most of you know my opinion on abortion, and this is where a lot of it comes from. If God knows me individually before I was born, it answers the question, is that a human being living or not? Because God knows me. He knew me before I was born, and not only did he know me, he has a plan for me. He has a plan for you. There is no accidents in God's world. With Esther, she was born in the most miserable of times. An orphan girl taken into captivity, and then very quickly people wanting to destroy her and all her people. Now, if you haven't read the book of Esther, I will tell you, I'm going to give you a little cheat here. It does have a happy ending. The same gallows that Haman had set up for Mordecai, Haman himself was hung on. And in fact, the Jews to this day celebrate the festival of Purim in the spring to commemorate what happened in the book of Esther. This is not just a fanciful story. This is not a novel. This actually happened. The kings are historically documented. The dynasties that these people were living under are completely documented by all the history that you can do. Genealogy, it's all there. This happened. Now, that's all well and fine for Esther and Mordecai. It turned out okay, but what about you and me in 2021? What does that have to say to you and me? And I will suggest to you that if God can deliver Mordecai, Esther, and all the Jews in the land of Susa from a king as mighty as those kings were, he can deliver you from any problems you have. It's just a matter of whether do you trust him or not. I don't know why we face the troubles we face. I don't know some of the solutions that we need to take. I can't tell you how to balance a $30 trillion deficit budget. I'm not a good financial person. Does that concern me? Absolutely. It terrifies me. But what I can tell you is, who do I put my trust in? And I will quickly tell you, I do not trust mankind. I do not trust governments. I do not trust philosophers and ideologists who tell me all sorts of great ideas, because I've seen too often where they have been wrong and they have failed. Who I do trust is God. And why? Because he has shown me through his scripture, through other people's lives, through my own life, that he can and does overcome all the problems that I'm world. Today, things are going to get worse before they get better. And I will tell you, I believe firmly that each and every one of you is here for a reason. There is a purpose. God has a plan for your lives. Now, you may want to sit down in the office and say, okay, Rick, God's got a plan, you explain it to me. And I can't, but he can. Notice what Esther and Mordecai did when they didn't know what to do. They prayed. They went to God and they said, we're going to listen for God to speak to us. Prayer is our solution to not knowing. We as a church are not praying enough. We as a people of Christians are not praying enough. We need, like Esther and Mordecai, to get serious about going to God and saying, God, I live in a troubled time and I don't have answers. He has a plan for you. Now, the sad truth is, because of free will, you don't have to follow that plan. You can, like Jonah, go the opposite way. And I believe that in some circumstances where there is only one individual who can do what they do, Mordecai alluded to this when he was talking to Esther. He says, you're the one that God's put before the king. You seem to be the obvious person to do what needs to be done. But if you don't do it, God will do something else because he's God. My friends, too many people are relying on that backup today. Too many people are saying, I don't want to be the one who steps forward. I don't want to be the brave one. I don't want to be in hard times. I don't want to be in a controversial time. And I'll be honest with you, I understand that. I truly do. I'm that way myself. I'd just as soon not have more troubles. I'd like to go with more easy life. But I'm also here to tell you that I've read enough of the Bible and watched enough people's lives in that Bible to see what happens when they either follow God or run from God. And I'm here to tell you, the ones who have the best outcomes, the ones that follow God. There's a guy named Henry Blackaby. He wrote some pretty interesting stuff throughout the time. One of his series called Experiencing God. If you ever get a chance to do it, I highly recommend it. But Henry Blackaby made a comment. He says, watch and see where God is working and join him in his work. I've literally taken that to heart. I've had dozens of phone calls from both the UCC and from the Quakers, wanting me on this committee or this thing or that thing. And I understand committees. For the most part, they're well-intentioned. But what I've had to tell them is, I'm at a point where I don't have unlimited time, unlimited strength, and so I am going to look and see where I see God working, and there I'm going. I've told you before, I'm on the board for Wings of Refuge. I'm not serving on half a dozen committees. I am serving on that board because what I see is God moving in that organization. I see God lurking through that organization. It's doing what Blackaby says. Look where God is moving and you go there. As Christians, we've got to quit doing the same old, fulfilling the same principles of doing all the right motions and going nowhere fast. I can't tell you how many committee meetings I've been in that we spent 6 hours in talks. At the end of the 6 hours, I left going, what did we just do? We had a lot of conversations, we had a lot of discussions, and we had a lot of important conversations, but we did absolutely nothing. The situation was the same as it was when we began, and we did nothing to discern and change that. And I'm telling you, friends, one of the reasons churches are dying is we've committed them to death. We've said, and I'm trying not to be sarcastic because we have a committee meeting coming up with the council. It is important to hold those meetings, but it's also important when we do them to do them with a sense of being directed by God. Because if it's just a group of us human beings trying to decide the right route, we will waste our time and we will fail. Blackaby also wrote, "You cannot stay where you are and go with God. You cannot continue doing what your way and accomplish God's purpose in your way. Your thinking cannot come close to God's thought, for you do not the will of God. You must adjust your life to Him, His purpose, and His ways." What Blackaby is saying very simply is, just doing what you've done is not going to get you very far. In fact, you're going to fail. If you want to follow God, it's going to be a whole different attitude. It's going to mean, "Here am I, Lord, use me." Or, "I am here for such a time as this. What is your plan?" And I think too often there is too much of us that wants to go the comfortable route. Most of you have grown up in a church where committees have done the majority of what needs to be done in the church. And now in 2021, we look around us and we look at all the empty buildings and we go, what happened to the church? Where did everybody go? And the truth of it is, man and women thought they could do the work of God on their own will and their own strength and their own power. And they failed. And many of those churches have closed. And I'm afraid to tell you, more are following. The fact of the matter is, in the next 10 years, I expect to see a third of the churches that you are seeing today gone. A third is a lot of numbers. Many of the churches that are thriving with full pews are already starting to suffer and see decline. Some of the mega churches in Des Moines that had 2,000 people coming are already talking about closing. Because what they did was great for a moment, and it got real popular for a moment, but it wasn't following God. It wasn't doing what God had planned for them to do. And so it failed. You and I have an obligation to say, Lord, what is your plan for me today? Not just in my church, but in my community, in my family. What is it that you have planned for me? And it kind of reminds me of a little girl who came home from Sunday school and says, I'm a little confused. And she says, what by? She goes, well, my Sunday school teacher says God is bigger than any of us. Her mother said, that's true. But she also says, Jesus is supposed to live inside me. And the mother says, that's true also. What confuses you? She goes, well, if he's so much bigger than me, and he lives inside of me, shouldn't he show through me? And I love that profound question. Because the answer is absolutely yes. If Jesus is in me, if I'm desiring to do his will, if I want to do his plan, then absolutely Jesus Christ is going to be seen through me. My physical impairments, my poor abilities are going to pale because Jesus Christ is showing through me. I want him to show through me. I want him to appear as something that is just literally guiding this poor, misguided fool that I am to do what I do. I don't want to ever have anyone consider me good at what I do. I am not good at what I do. God is good at doing what he does. And if I listen and I follow God's plan, it goes quite well. If I don't, I will fall straight out of this pew because I'm that klutzy. You and I are people planned by God to do God's will in this day, in this time. The question is, are we allowing God to shine through us, or are we following our own plans for our lives? The problems you face are way bigger than you are. I cannot give you answers that will solve the problems you face. But what I can tell you is the same thing that Mordecai told Esther thousands of years ago, is God can and will deliver through us. And perhaps you are in the time that you're in and the places that you're in right now because God has a plan for you in this world. He has people for you to influence, for people that you can reach that I will never talk to. I know plenty of people who will talk to you guys, but the second they hear the title pastor, have no desire to speak to me because they already have a preconceived idea of what a pastor is or isn't. That gives you an opportunity to speak to people in a way that I cannot. And I'm here to tell you, if you pray and you say, God, what is your plan for me? And you sincerely pray that and you sincerely seek that, God will display a plan that he has uniquely for you, that only you can do, and that it will be, as Jeremiah said, a success. He said, I have a plan for you to excel, to succeed, not to fail. Now, if God has that kind of plan, and God is God, I got to ask you a dumb question. Why aren't I not following him closer? After all, he's God, and he has a plan for me to succeed. What part of that makes no sense to not follow? And the answer to that question is none of it. We are Christians for such a time as this. And my friends, you are here and now for a purpose. It behooves us to find out what God's purpose is for us so that we can start doing what he needs us to do. Because times are not getting any easier. And I suggest that if we don't get too busy, they're not going to get better. They're going to get worse. But God is still on that throne, and he's still in control. So, thank you. If you will turn